I'm going to be reading the Bible for us today. We are reading from 1 Corinthians 8, and I think it'll come up on the screens as well. Now, about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. But knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. But whoever loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat whatever is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall.
How are you feeling? I ask. Nervous, he replies. Good, I say. I want you to feel nervous. That was me with my 16-year-old son as we sat in our car, him behind the wheel, about to begin our very first driving lesson. He wanted to learn to drive. I wanted him to grasp the weightiness of what he was embarking on. Because while learning to drive is really good, isn't it? All these new freedoms, all these new possibilities, it can be deadly. You're controlling this machine that weighs 2 tons on this artificially cleared surface that makes it possible for us to go at crazy speeds, and then there's all these other imperfect humans controlling their 2-ton weight vehicle heading towards you. When you introduce a child to driving, it's like introducing them to fire or to sharp knives. It's one of those good things that really needs to come with a warning. If you misuse this, it could hurt you. It could kill you. It could kill you and other people as well. I'm glad you're nervous, son. I want you to feel nervous. Now today, I have a warning like that for you. It's not about driving or fire or sharp knives. It's about something even more potent, because this, if misused, can cause spiritual harm, even spiritual death. And this warning is especially appropriate for us in week 1 of the Bible College year, because this year at Bible College, you will be acquiring this dangerous thing. You'll be growing in it here at SMBC. In fact, it's what you've come to college to get, and it's good that you get it. I want you to get it, but it's got to come with a warning. I want you to feel nervous as you grow in this. I want you to feel the weight of responsibility that comes with having it. I want you to know that if you misuse it, it could cause harm to you and to others. What is this thing? It's knowledge. Theological knowledge. In our text today, Paul is addressing a serious situation in the church in Corinth where some are using their theological knowledge in a way that's spiritually destructive. And Paul has this strong warning for them, and it's a warning about the misuse of theological knowledge. And so as we begin this new Bible college year and we throw ourselves into the good task of growing in our theological knowledge, this is a warning that we all need to hear. So let's turn to 1 Corinthians 8 now. We're going to dive into Paul's warning, but before we can make sense of that warning, we need to kind of piece together what was going on in Corinth. What was the background to this letter? The topic, as you would have heard as Marie read it out a moment ago, the topic is food sacrificed to idols, sacrificial food, idol food. And this was quite simply food, which was in most cases meat. That's what we're talking about. Meat which has been offered to a pagan god as part of a pagan cultic ritual. And then it either would have been served up straight away in the temple as part of a temple feast, or it might have been sold later at the meat market. That's what we're talking about. Now, why has it become such a big issue in the Corinthian church? Well, they are grappling with this question. Can we eat it? Now that we've become Christians, now that we've left pagan idolatry and false worship behind us, can we still eat this idol food? It seems that there's two camps in the Corinthian church. Group 1 says, yes, we can. And group 2 says, yeah, we're not so sure about that. We think that eating it would probably be sinful. Now, group 1, the yes group, seem to have written to Paul, and Paul's been quoting this letter throughout 1 Corinthians ever since chapter 7. They've written to him, and it seems that when it came to idol food, they were insisting in their letter on their right to eat the idol food and justifying it with reference to their theological knowledge. We can piece it together because like I said, we find Paul quoting them in his letter. He typically quotes them and then he responds to them. He quotes them and he responds to them. You can see that in verse 1. Have a look there. Paul writes, now about food sacrificed to idols. We know that, quote, we all possess knowledge. That's what they were saying. And then he goes on to respond to that. And then if you jump down to verse 4, you see the same pattern. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that, quoting them again, an idol is nothing at all in the world, and, quoting them again, there is no God but one. And then on he goes to respond to what they're saying. And you can actually piece together from those verse 4 quotes there, we can work out what their argument was, can't we? They're saying something like this, there's only one true God. And that means idols are nothing. And if idols are nothing, there can't be any problem with eating food sacrificed to them because they're nothings. They're non-existent nothings. How could they possibly exercise any spiritual power over us? How could they spiritually contaminate the food? They're nothings. It's just food, so we can eat it. That seems to be their argument. And it's important to grasp that as they make that argument, they seem to be playing the I've got the gift of knowledge card as they do it. I've worked out that eating idol food is okay because I'm one of the people with the spiritual gift of knowledge. Now that taps into a big issue throughout the book of 1 Corinthians, the use of gifts at Corinth. Throughout the letter, Paul's trying to deal with that issue. It seems that some in Corinth are bragging, either verbally or through their actions, bragging about having certain spiritual gifts, and they're using those gifts to lift themselves up, to get themselves a superior spiritual status or reputation. Back at the start of the letter, it was the gift of wisdom that Paul had to address. Here in chapter 8 and following, it's the gift of knowledge. And later we'll see in the semester, it's also the gift of speaking in tongues. So on this idol food issue, it seems that the yes group wasn't just saying we have the gift of knowledge and so we know it's okay to eat this food, but they were also saying having this gift of knowledge, or at least implying having this gift of knowledge, makes us special. It demonstrates our spiritual maturity. It authenticates our standing before God. And we're going to prove just how spiritually mature we are by actually eating this idol food. That seems to be what was going on. Okay, now what does Paul say to all of that? as I said before, he's got a warning, a really heavy warning for them. And the warning comes in two parts. The first part is here in verses 1 to 3, and it's this. Knowledge without love is deadly for us. That is, the ones claiming to have the knowledge. Knowledge without love is deadly for us. Have a look at verse 1. So remember, we saw before in verse 1, Paul quotes them bragging about their knowledge. We all possess knowledge. Then his response, end of verse 1, he says, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Ouch. Knowledge puffs up, he says to them. They thought that their knowledge lifted them up to this special spiritual status. And Paul says to them, all it's doing is puffing them up with false self-importance. They thought their theological knowledge was a marker of their elevated spiritual maturity. And Paul says that the way that they're using it is actually a marker of their spiritual immaturity and pride. He's not saying all knowledge is inherently bad. Of course, he's not saying that. But it's like driving or fire or sharp knives. It's a good thing, which is terribly dangerous when it's misused. So how might we misuse this good thing? Well, it's by using it without love. Knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Love takes that knowledge and it uses it for good, for edification, for the benefit of others. It builds up. Knowledge without love is spiritually deadly for us because it inflates us with pride and it tempts us to put our confidence in the fact that we have it. And Paul goes on to unpack that a bit more in verses 2 and 3. Have a look at those verses. Paul writes, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought, but whoever loves God is known by God. So Paul's sort of saying here, just think about the danger of showcasing your theological knowledge as a badge of your spiritual status, or of your standing before God. For starters, verse 2, even those of us who do know a lot, we don't know it all. We don't yet know as we ought. The knowledge that we have is incomplete. So it's a pretty flimsy, insecure basis for your spiritual standing, knowledge. But then, verse 3, if you want a marker, if you want a sign that you're in God's grace, that you're known by God, that you're accepted by God, there's a much better one than knowledge. Love. The one who loves is the one who is showing themselves to be spiritually mature, to be in relationship with God. Whoever loves God, he says, verse 3, is known by God. Or a similar thought, a similar dynamic expressed by Jesus. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. If you want a marker, look to love. Love's the marker that you want. Love will point to the presence of spiritual health. Knowledge by itself will not do that. In fact, without love, knowledge is deadly because it puffs up, it makes us conceited, it gives us an inflated sense of our importance. It gives us something to falsely put our confidence in and makes us look down on people who don't have as much of it as we do. Brothers and sisters, as a Bible college community, let's hear this warning especially carefully. While you're here, your theological knowledge will grow, probably exponentially. Soon you will have more theological knowledge than most people in your church, than maybe most Christians around the world. And while most people out there in Australian society won't particularly give you much respect for that, inside the church, they will. Some will start to view you differently. Some will start to give you, probably accord to you a particular status or respect because you have all of this knowledge. Perhaps increasingly start deferring to your theological views. Wow, how easy would it be to start enjoying that? To start building your identity around that? To really like being the respected one with the knowledge at your church? How easy would it be to start flaunting that, or to start wielding it to your own advantage? To start thinking of yourself as better than others, as more spiritual, more devoted, more blessed, because, well, more frankly, more loved by God, because you have this theological knowledge that others don't. Let's hear Paul's warning. Knowledge puffs up. Knowledge without love is deadly for us. Being surrounded here by lecturers and books and maybe high marks for essays, it could give you the illusion of spiritual maturity. But if you use that knowledge without love, far from being mature, you're actually spiritually immature and in spiritual danger. A little while back, someone was telling me about her experience when she first arrived at university as an 18-year-old, and she met other Christians there, and she found them intimidating because they had so much knowledge. She told me how one of them asked her, "Are you a Calvinist or an Arminian?" And she said to me, as she described this experience, "I felt so stupid because I didn't know what a Calvinist or an Arminian was." Now, maybe you don't yet know what a Calvinist or an Arminian is. If you don't, you will learn that here at college. And you're going to learn a lot more. And by the end of your course, your theological knowledge will probably be exploding out of your head. The question I have for you is, how are you going to use it? To play a game of one-upmanship with others by asking people tricky questions to show them what they don't know? By lifting yourself up above others who know less? Or will you use it to love others? Knowledge by itself puffs up. Knowledge without love is deadly for us. So that's the first part of this two-part warning. The second is that knowledge without love is also deadly for others, people around us, when we use that knowledge without love. So in verses 1 to 3, that what we've just seen, Paul sort of tackled the underlying issue, this pride in knowledge issue. Now he moves to their question they've expressed, which is, what do we do about this idol meat, from verses 4 to the end of the chapter. So as we saw before, he started this new section in verse 4, quoting their argument, right? An idol is nothing, there's no God but one, that's their argument. Idols are nothing, so why couldn't we eat the idol food? That's their argument. From verse 5 onwards, we start to see Paul's response to that. Let's have a look at that now, verse 5. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. I think what Paul's doing here in his response is he's nuancing their argument a little bit. He's saying, well, in one sense, there are other gods. I mean, people worship those idols. They give allegiance to them. So in that sense, there are other worshipped things out there. But basically, he's agreeing with the Corinthians. Yes, Corinthians, you're right. For us, at least, there's only one God. And he's basically accepting, therefore, that they do have true theological knowledge. You're right, there is only one God. And even their deduction from that knowledge, that eating the idol food is therefore okay, even that, he's accepting that they're right, well, at least in the abstract. In fact, if we keep reading chapter 8 and all the way through to chapter 10, we'll see at various points, he says it's fine to eat idol meat in certain circumstances. If you've bought it at the market or you're at a friend's house and no one tells you where it's from, it's fine to eat it. So he's agreeing with them, at least in abstract, about their deduction that it's okay to eat the food. Their knowledge then is right. The meat can actually be eaten. So what's the problem then? The problem is, verse 7, that not everyone possesses this knowledge. I'll keep reading from verse 7. Some people are still so accustomed, says Paul, some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. So the problem is that some, and Paul goes on to call them the weak who've only recently come out of paganism, who've only recently come out of idol worship and converted to Christ. They've spent years in the past eating idol food as an act of worship to that idol or the God behind that idol. For them, when they now eat idol food as Christians, they can't banish the old meaning from their hearts and minds. They can't eat it without being drawn back into idol worship. For them, this idol food is spiritually contaminated. Eating it does compromise their allegiance to Christ, their obedience to Christ. And so when they eat it, it is an act of false worship and they are defiled. So yes, in the abstract, eating food is a matter of indifference. Paul sort of goes on to say that in verse 8. Food does not bring us near to God. We're no worse if we do not eat, no better if we do. In the abstract, it's okay, but we don't live in the abstract. None of us live in the abstract. We live with people around us. And therefore, verse 9, the warning is, be careful that the exercise of your rights, that is the right that you have to eat what you know not to be spiritually contaminated food, be careful that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. How might it be that? Why would these people eating it cause others to stumble? Well, verse 10, for if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? If these ones claiming knowledge were flaunting their gift, if they were holding it out as a marker of their spiritual maturity and standing before God, yeah, we have this gift of knowledge. We know idols are just silly superstitions. We know it's okay to eat. Imagine how the weak would have felt. Imagine the pressure they'd have felt to eat as well to demonstrate that they weren't spiritually so inferior. Especially when the ones that are kind of paraded in the community as the most mature are doing it. But when they did it against their conscience. They did it still associating that act of eating as an act of worship of the God behind the idol. And the results are devastating. Verse 11, so this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. Destroyed. It's not just that they're offended, it's that they're drawn into false worship, resulting in spiritual damage and harm to them. It's far worse than just, well, you've made them upset because you've done things in a different way to them. It's no, they're going to be brought to spiritual ruin by this thing that you're doing of eating. That's what's at stake here. That's what could happen to the weak, not to mention what could happen to the one doing the eating. Verse 12, have a look at that. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. This is sin, says Paul. This use of knowledge without love that causes others to stumble, it's sin. It's sin against them who are stumbling. It's sin against Christ because Christ dwells in them. So what should we do then with this potent, dangerous thing that we've got, this theological knowledge that could cause us to sin and others to stumble? Well, verse 13, Paul says, therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. That's how far Paul is willing to go. He'll go so far in loving his brothers and sisters that he'll give up doing things that he knows from his theological knowledge that he's free to do. He'll give it all up, even to the point of never eating meat again. Okay, so we've heard the twofold warning. Knowledge without love is deadly for us, and it's deadly for others. Now, building out of that warning, I have 2 exhortations for us. First, let us use our knowledge in love. Brothers and sisters, we are gaining something precious here at SMBC, theological knowledge, and you're working hard to get it, and you will spend hours this year reading and listening and reflecting and discussing, and rightly so. This is a noble pursuit, the pursuit of theological knowledge. But the question I have for you today is, will you work just as hard to develop the loving character that you will need to use such a potent, precious thing well? Don't let your growth in knowledge outstrip your growth in love. Just reflect for a moment on what Paul has done in chapter 8. To the question, can we eat idol food? He's given the answer, yes, but don't. It's crazy, isn't it? Yes, but don't. What does that tell us about knowledge? What does that tell us about abstract theological knowledge? It tells us that abstract theological knowledge, the yes part of that answer, is nothing without a context in which love needs to be expressed. The but don't part of the answer. Knowledge is precious, but until we work out how to use it in love, it's nothing. In fact, it's worse than nothing, because if it's misused, it causes harm. So then the big question is, well, how do we make sure that we're using our theological knowledge in love? And I think there's a couple of little tests, little questions we can ask, which draw out of some key images, 2 key images in this passage. The first one's a building image, which comes with the question, what is it that we're building? What are we building? Whenever we use our theological knowledge, we are building something. The question is, what's it going to be? Will it be our own self-importance, because knowledge puffs up? Or will it be the faith of others, because love builds up? Will it be the sin of others? If you have another look at verse 10, when Paul says, when the weak sees you eating, won't that person be emboldened to eat? That word emboldened, it could be translated built up to eat. So there's more building going on here. Won't they be built up to sin? So once again, the question is, what are we building? Are we building their sin alongside our pride? Or are we building their faith, their growth in Christ? What are we building? What kind of growth is happening when you and I put our theological knowledge to use in the world? Because every time we use it, something gets built. The other image has to do with standing versus stumbling. In verse 8, when Paul says, food does not bring us near to God, that could be translated, food does not make us stand before God. So at issue here is this issue of whether we will stand before God, God the judge. Will we stand before him? Now, in the abstract, whether or not we eat that food, it doesn't affect our standing before God. Paul's already said that. But the truth is that we don't live in the abstract, and in the community, doing certain things with food lovelessly can cause people not to stand, but instead to stumble. Verse 9, be careful of the exercise of your rights doesn't become a stumbling block. Verse 13, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, literally to stumble, I'll never eat meat again. So if the first test was, what am I building? The second test is, am I helping others to stand or to stumble? It's a radically other person-centered way to do life, isn't it? Focusing on them, on their faith, prioritizing them being able to stand, being built up in the faith. So I want to ask you again, how are you using your theological knowledge? A little while back, I met a young Christian man who just happens to be in a midweek Bible study with one of the lecturers here at SMBC. And I'm not going to embarrass the lecturer and actually name him right now. I'll probably tell him later to encourage him. But you should have heard the way this young guy described what it was like to be in a Bible study with that lecturer. He said, he's so humble. He must know so much. But he just listens to our ideas. He encourages us. I always get the feeling that he wants me to have a go at saying what the Bible has said and what it means for my life. I always get the feeling that he wants me to grow. What a beautiful testimony that is. What an example of using knowledge in love to empower, to encourage, to build up. So that's the first exhortation. Let's use our knowledge in love. Second one is, let's lovingly consider what might cause others to stumble. This is a loving thing that we can do. It's to proactively evaluate our actions, the things that we're doing, for their impact on others. To be asking, well, might doing this thing, which I think is okay, which I think I've got the freedom to do, might doing this cause him to stumble or cause her to stumble? Now, wow, there are all sorts of ways we could go with that. There are all sorts of ways that we might cause someone to stumble. But for today, let's just focus on the particular scenario here where someone with a background in false worship has a particular susceptibility to stumbling when it comes to the things associated with their pre-Christ false worship. Remember verse 7? He says, some are still so accustomed to the idols that when they eat the sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god. See, because of their background, because of their history with that particular expression of worship, they can't eat the idol food without being drawn back into the false worship. Now, again, I think here at SMBC, we need to think really hard about this because we want to be a light for Christ in the world. We want to see people from all faiths, from all worldview backgrounds, come to know Christ and become a disciple of Christ. And when they do, and we're discipling them in their new faith, the question is, how are they going to relate to the things associated with their pre-Christ false worship? The trappings and the forms of whatever way they worshipped before they came to Christ. Now, in the mission world at the moment, there's actually a strong push for missionaries to encourage new believers to retain the trappings of their previous faith for the sake of cultural relevance, for the sake of contextualization. Let me give you an example from our experience in Southeast Asia. In our first year there, I remember meeting a Muslim background believer. And he told me how when he came to faith, he'd converted from Islam, the missionary that discipled him taught him to pray to Jesus in the Muslim style, using the Muslim prayer mat, facing Mecca, doing the ritual washing beforehand, doing all the bowing and prostrations that Muslims do when they pray, but changing the words so that they were prayers to God through Jesus. Now, I think we need to ask the question, is that wise? With this believer who had spent decades before he came to Christ performing that ritual as a way of wiping his sin away and earning merit with God, for him it was a works righteousness ritual. For him it was false worship. Now that he's come to Christ and he's seeking to learn to embrace grace instead, is it wise to advise him to keep doing that ritual from his false worship past? Might that not be like getting him to eat idol food in an idol temple? These are questions we need to ask as we disciple people in the faith. Now, maybe the person that you'll be discipling won't be from a Muslim background. Maybe it'll be Buddhism or Hinduism. They'll have different things, different associations, different susceptibilities from their pre-Christ false worship that might make them stumble. Or maybe the person that you'll be discipling will have come from no religion at all. Maybe it's secular materialism is their false worship background. Again, we need to ask what might make them stumble. Maybe their pre-Christ false worship involves sexual immorality or alcohol or consumerism or workaholism or status and success. As we interact with other Christians, as we disciple new Christians, as we love them, as we worship with them, let us lovingly consider what might cause them to stumble. What might be the idol food equivalent for them that draws them into false worship? This takes wisdom, doesn't it? It takes time and care to consider how we can love the people around us, looking at their background. But the biggest thing it takes is love, the kind of love that's willing to sacrificially give things up. The kind of love that made Paul ready to never eat meat again for the sake of the weak. The kind of love that made Jesus willing to give up his life for the sake of us all. May God, by his Spirit, give us that kind of a love, that we too might willingly give up whatever it takes that our brothers and sisters might stand.